So much so that we haven't got the time to go into it here. I wish we did.
Oh, we've got time. Don't worry about him. He's on the floor over there. Don't listen to him.
Steve, how are you? I'm very honoured to meet you. How are you,
Nice
sir?
I'm pretty good. I'm fairly well, considering sleep is a premium.
At the moment, absolutely.
Yes.
Is the body clock still all over the place?
Yeah, but it's getting better just about the time we're ready to leave. Let me make sure my phone is off. This management? No.
Hello there, how are you?
Nice to meet you.
Okay.
Thanks for having us.
Hey, no problem. It's a pre-recorded interview, so thank you for doing this. Really
Yes,
appreciate
my pleasure.
it.
So how's my sound? Good? Test 1, 2.
You sound, we've done a mic test already, but
All right,
just go again.
Testing,
for
1,
me.
2, 1, 2. I'll just use
perfect.
no headphones. I'll just talk.
So, Steve, here you are. First question is how are you feeling doing it back on that road again now? I mean, writing, recording, and here we are talking about a new album. How does it feel to be back doing it?
Well, to be perfectly honest with you, you realize that I never did this when I was in the band. I never did much interviewing, and or print or any radio too much, and I sort of felt back in the day, a bit arrogant as it sounds, and I was quite young, you know. I had a philosophy that if the music isn't right and I'm not singing good enough, then talking about it's not going to make any difference. So I'll just make sure I sing and do the best I can and leave it alone. And so I did that and didn't do interviews. And then when I did take my big hiatus, when I left the group, I obviously didn't do them then either. So this is the first time I've actually been doing all this stuff.
And it's a pleasure to hear you talking about the new album. It's an amazing album.
Thank you.
There's something about this album that, listening to it, whilst I always feel you've been really honest in all of your performances and it's all been genuine, I just sense that this means just that little bit more to you. When I hear you singing those lyrics, it just feels a little bit more personal.
Well,
is that how you describe it?
I think after being gone for 31 years and living life kind of on life's terms, you know, as we all do, that was something I had to do. I had to go back into my hometown and retouch the foundation of my youth and go out and visit some grave sites of my departed family who raised me and get in touch with things that I remember before I was so fortunate to be in the music business. And as a result of doing that for quite a few years, I think life sort of had its way of recentering, recalibrating my compass again emotionally. And of course, meeting Kelly was a big part of that too. And then losing Kelly was a big part of that. And then the music started to come back to me because it had gone away, you know. The passion for it had left me. And I was very concerned about that. So I had to quit, touring at that point because that was the only answer. But I think to answer your question, I think this album has a lot of emotion in the voice, and I think, by the way, I talk about myself third person. I think he's pretty sincere when he's singing in this record.
It comes across, it really does. And you touch on Kelly. We're fortunate because we've got you back, and I suppose you could say she's touched all our lives as fans of you, because were it not for Dr. Kelly Nash, you wouldn't be back doing this, would you?
Yeah.
Tell us how she inspired you in this new record.
Well, one night, I'll never forget, one of our favorite times together was when we turned the lights off, we have a smooch and go to bed, and we talk to each other in the dark, and one puts the other to sleep somehow. Who was always wondering who crashes first, but that particular night she said, "Honey, there's something I need to ask you." And I said, "Well, what's that?" She said, "If something was to ever happen to me, that make me one promise." I said, "Well, what's that?" She said, "That you would not go back into isolation." So I just was quiet for a second. Then she said, "For I think it would make this all for naught." And I'm thinking she's looking at the whole arc of her life and us meeting and us being together and the potential of us not being together. And, of course I said, "I promise I would not do that." But just so you know, I wasn't isolating from the world. I was out in the world. I mean, I'd cut my hair off. I'd gained about 50 pounds, so I was living my life exactly the way I wanted to, and back in my hometown and traveling with Kelly and enjoying ourselves. But I was isolated deeply from music and songwriting and singing. I wasn't singing in the shower. I wasn't doing
Really?
it. No,
Nothing.
I walked away from it pretty severely. So the promise I'm keeping is talking to you right now.
How do you manage to do that when, and we'll talk about your early life in a few moments, but what we do know about you is music was your life. You were born to sing. This is what you did. And everybody deserves a holiday every now and again. But
Yeah.
how do you turn that off and walk away from it completely for as long as you did?
It was not easy. It was not easy. It was necessary, but not easy. I was very fortunate to be in the band, and we did such great music together. We didn't talk much. I think our music was the way we conversed with each other. And sometimes that was good communication. Sometimes it was combative communication. But that's what music, as a language can do when you're in a band together. So there wasn't a lot of talking about, well, how are you feeling today? Are you a little tired? No. That we would just show up, rock, and then go our separate ways sometimes,
Yeah.
So it kind of snuck up on them, but I was slowly feeling more and more separated from the passion I had for music that I found as a child. I found it when I was about 7, 8 years old in the 45s I was listening to when my parents split up. So it gave me a place I could go to, a landscape to escape in, listening to that music. And I'd lost that. So when that went away, I started getting very uncomfortable. Though I was still singing fine, I was still performing, we're still touring, there was a hole in my chest that kept getting bigger and bigger. And back in those days, we all were filling ourselves with some party behaviors, should I say, and that was not going to be the solution for what I was starting to go through. So I just one day out of the blue, surprising to them, said, I just can't do this anymore. I got to stop. And I mean stop. So that when I did walk away, to answer your question, it was not easy. I had to keep just walking. I couldn't turn around. I couldn't fall back in it. I had
The
to
temptation there to do it.
the temptation was great because face my feelings of fear and not sure where I'm going. Face my feelings of walking into the abyss and away from a dream come true of being in the music business. What am I doing? I'd say to myself. Well, I can't just fall back into it. I gotta find out why I'm not enough on my own. That's the truth. I needed to be okay by myself. And that was the whole thing that kept driving me forward, that somehow I must be enough on my own. And without I love the applause. I love the adoration. I love the performance. I love being in front of people. I'm a bit of a ham. So, but all that being said, I had to let that go severely.
Did you know, every Journey fan and then every Steve Perry fan, me being one of them, has always hoped this
I owe
day...
you money, by the way, for saying that.
No, genuinely. But we've always lived in hope that this day would come where we sat here talking about a new Steve Perry record, never knowing whether it would happen. Did you know that one day it would happen, even if you didn't know when? Or was there a time when you thought it would never happen?
No. I mean, the only way for me to absolutely commit to the abyss of a new life was to not look back. There was no knowing or possibility or back doors built in. I had to literally just walk forward and not look back. I really had to. Yeah. And only it just showed up on its own. And that's why it's such a meaningful, life-sustaining thing to me right now, to make this record, to record this record, to mix and produce this record with my co-producer Tom Flowers and all the musicians that I just so loved working with: Pino Palladino, Vinnie Caluto, Josh Freese, Steve Ferroni. I mean, just a multitude of great musicians, and some that aren't famous, that are just talented people in that area. It was just a dream come true. So the passion I found in the process, I would get goosebumps on my arms, and I turned to my engineer, Tom, and I said, Tom, I've done some cool things in my life, but nothing can give me this on my arm like what I'm just hearing Vinny lay down out there. So that is golden to me. It's life-sustaining. It really is.
What happened during your time out, though, in your years away, was your fan base, it was always huge, it was always massive. It grew beyond belief, particularly in the UK.
You know, and I didn't know that. You know, isn't it terrible? I'm embarrassed to say I walked so far away that I didn't know that.
You look at the UK.
I know that sounds funny, but I'm being honest.
No, absolutely.
You
I
know?
totally understand that. And when you look at the UK in particular, I mean, Don't Stop Believing, for example, has been in the charts more times over the last 10 years than it ever did in the 80s. So there's a generation of people now who know who you are and want to get to know you now.
I got a platinum record from the Glee version alone.
Yeah.
You know?
So,
I mean, wow. You know?
So let's use this opportunity for that generation to learn a little bit about you. Let's go back to where it all began for you.
Please, How
old were you when you discovered this voice and what you could do with it? I mean, I'm guessing you always sang as a child, but when did you realise just what a tool you had?
Well, I didn't really realize it, but my mother heard it when I was 3 years old. She said I used to walk around the house and hit a high C that used to go through her head. And she was just doing the best she could to tolerate my voice, because I would just go, ah, you know. So I think that's not, of course, my vocal talents began somewhere in that point. But I really believe the beginnings of it started with my father when I was about 4 years old. I watched him perform at the Hanford Civic Auditorium in a production with my mother, who was a dancer in this production, and he was out front singing. And I would just remember sitting in the front row of these fold-up chairs, and I can still to this day see my sandals with my white socks, my little shorts with which matching jacket suit with my white outfit and tie, and I'm looking up at him sing, and I'm looking down at my feet kicking because I can't touch the ground, I'm so small, and I'm looking up at him and I'm thinking, I can do that, and I'm looking back at my feet rocking back and forth. It was just a connection I felt between him singing, saying to myself, I can do that. And so somewhere as time went on, he would sing to me at night. And then I discovered 45 RPM records, and I would play this music, and I would hear these voices, and I would hear these echoes and these melodies and these drum pockets, and it became an island that I could escape to and live in. And then I tried my best to mimic some of those, the best I could when I was younger, just to try to feel from the inside out a little bit of what I was feeling from the outside in, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, there was no other way to try it. And boy, that was the beginning of learning a big deficit that existed, you know? I mean, so especially when you're listening to Sam Cooke, you know, you're saying, where do I start with that? You know? But that's what I did, yeah.
And then when you started performing, that was at a young age as well, and you got your first bands together.
Actually, I started performing in barbershop quartets.
Was
when
it?
I was 7.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, right.
Actually, I've not told nobody that. That's the first time I mentioned it.
We've got an exclusive from
No, it's true. It was barbershop quartet, and we performed for the Chamber of Commerce and the Rotary Clubs, and I would wear my little bow tie and my white shirt. And my butch haircut.
Do the pictures still exist?
It does. It's in the Hanford Sentinel in the archives somewhere. Yes.
But looking at your early days in bands, I know you had a couple of really big near misses, and someone who was always quite influential in your life was your mother Mary, and she was the one that encouraged you to take that step.
You have done your homework. My God. You know about my mom. That's incredible.
She encouraged you to take that step that changed your life.
It's kind of a big story. I mean, my dad was a singer, and they were so in love, but my mother's father never liked the fact that he was a singer, and before he could marry my mother, he had to make a choice that he's going to either marry his daughter or be a singer. You can't do both. That was the times. And so he gave up a singing career to marry my mother. So that sort of became the beginning of that. And he never looked back, really. And I think as I got so fortunate to be successful, I let him know that I kind of did it for him too. But my mother did support me because she at an early age saw that I had a voice and put me in the barbershop quartets. And they unfortunately went through a tough time, and they eventually got a divorce when I was 7 years old. But that's when I was supported by her to continue my musical career. It was almost as if, to be honest with you, that my grandfather may have won that one, if you know what I mean, because he never really liked my father much, because he was a singer. He had problems with that. He wanted him to be a farmer or something more substantial.
Real job.
Yeah, not a singer, And so, being an old Portuguese farmer himself, that was just not going to work for him. And so, my mother loved him though, and it didn't work out. But she supported me, sort of. How can I say, in spite of what happened, just in, she believed I had talent, but she also was very supportive. So then I had bands. I started having groups, and I was attracted to drums. So if you look at the album cover, that's my drum set, my Gretsch drum set on the album cover that I originally got when I was freshman in high school. And I was in a band called the Sullys back in those days, and we were an R&B band, and we played for all the after game dances and things like that. And of course, then we started recording in Hollywood at Sunset Sound with our own money, and made some demos, and it sort of started a whole process.
And then Journey came along, and this was
years later.
The thing.
Years later. Yeah.
That, and we, for that generation that don't know much about your early days, how did that come about? Because the band were already together, and you joined the established lineup. Just tell us, if you can, quickly how.
Yeah.
That came about.
Well, there were certainly times where I'd run out of money as a teenager, go back to my hometown and work with my stepdad at that point, who was building everything from refurbishing bowling alleys to whatever. So I would do construction, and then I'd save money, and I would go back to Los Angeles and try to put together a new band, write some more music, make demos, turn them in. There was no American Idol or anywhere to get into the industry back then. It was just make demos and deliver them to a label with the hope somebody would hear them. Well, my demos got into the hands of Don Ellis at Columbia Records, and he loved what he heard. And at that point, it was a band called the Alien Project with Craig Cramp on drums and Richard Haddad on bass from Detroit and Steve DeLacy on guitar. We were kind of a trio. We also had Scott Thurston subbing for keyboards, who ended up becoming a member of Tom Petty Heartbreakers. He was in the Heartbreakers later on. But before then, he was with us. And so we had this great little band, and the record label was very excited about it. Then the bass player... unfortunately, on the weekend before we were supposed to talk about record deals, got killed in a car wreck, and his girlfriend survived. He did not, and so that was just the day I called my mother and said, "Mom, I'm not supposed to do this." She said, "What are you talking about?" I told her what happened. I said, "Every time I get this close, something bigger hits, and when I get this close, something bigger hits. And now I've never been this close. I'm about to be signed to Columbia Records. Don Ellis loves the band, and Richard just died in a car wreck, so I'm coming home." She said, No, don't come back. Something will happen. I'm really sorry, but just don't. Mom, I've already given my, my notice at the apartment, and I'll be back. Well, about 3 days later, I get the phone call from Don Ellis. He says, "I'm really sorry to hear what happened to your bass player. We loved your band, but we have this band called Journey on the label, and they've made a few records, and they're ready to make a musical change, a conscious musical change to more song-oriented tracks. Are you interested?" I said, "Well, of course. I've seen these guys play at the Starwood. I know Neil Schon is one of my favorite prolific guitar players in the world, and so yeah." So next thing I know, the manager, Herbie Herbert, called me, and I flew to Colorado, in Denver, Colorado, and they were opening for Emerson, Lake and Palmer at that point, and I stayed in a room with Neil that night after the show, and we wrote our first song together, which is called Patiently, on the Infinity record, and the rest is history.
No Erasing is the first single from the new album.
Yes, sir.
Of all the songs, I know you've written all of them, which would you say is the most personal and means the most to you?
On the new record, I would say they're all very personal to me now. It's a bit of a Pandora's box if I open up this record, because No Erasing is basically about a reunion of two people seeing each other for the first time in years, and they see each other at a class reunion, and they both have lives in different cities, but they're together alone for the first time in years, and they go off into a car and park where they used to park and smooch as kids and have a good time in the backseat of the car, smooching and talking a little bit, just innocently. And at the same time, talking about music sometimes can pale in comparison to the emotion that the melody and the lyric, once it's performed, can bring to you. So at that point, the song can have different levels of fantasies, different levels of meaning, I think, to different people. So I know it's been a long time coming since I saw your face is one meaning in a class reunion, also another meaning if you're standing on a stage looking at an audience. So there's a lot of different levels. There's other songs on the record. There's 2 songs on the record that were written before I met Kelly, and I never played them for Kelly because I was afraid they would bring an energy into her struggle to survive her cancer that I didn't want to bring to the forefront of her struggle. So most of all, and In the Ring are those 2 songs. They're the only 2 songs that are that deep about loss or that deep about that type of struggle. So after I was writing the rest of the material, which is upbeat and positive and fun and heartfelt too, these 2 songs, though I wrote them before I met her, while I was putting the record together, afterwards I realized those songs were about her before I met her, and they need to be on this record. So I put those in the record.
Steve Perry, thank you for coming back, and I hope you're here to stay for a good while. It's been too long.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate
Cheers.
it
Thank
very
you.
much.